I invite the Minister of Municipal Affairs to lead the House in prayer or reflection.
As we commence proceedings today in this assembly, we ask for divine guidance so that our words and deeds may bring to all people of this great province hope, prosperity, and a vision for the future. May the deliberations in this chamber be characterized by temperance, understanding, and reason, to the end that we may better serve those who have made the members of this House guardians of and trustees for all the citizens of British Columbia.
Introductions by members. Minister of Citizen Services.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. In the chamber today we have Gabe Leosis. Gabe is CA out of my office in Maple Ridge. He also is one of the youngest elected officials in the province. He's a school trustee for SD 42, and he's here in the legislature today shadowing me for the day, and I'm very excited to have him with us. Can we all please welcome him?
Member for Warner and Monashee.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Today, I also have a very special guest watching these proceedings in the gallery, Margot Jarman from Vernon. Margot is a great friend, a big supporter, and she's also a vice president for local BC NDP Constituency Association. Margot volunteers with BC Games and many other causes in the community. So this is Margot's first time to be in the legislature, sitting in the gallery to watch these proceedings. So would the House please join me to welcome Margot and make her feel very welcomed. Thank you.
Madam Clerk.
Introduction of bills.
Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have the honor to present a message from Her Honor, the Lieutenant Governor.
Her Honor, the Lieutenant Governor transmits herewith Bill number 48, Intituled Labour Statutes Amendment Act 2023, and recommends the same to the Legislative Assembly. Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I move that the bill be introduced or read a first time now. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to introduce Bill 48, the Labour Statutes Amendment Act 2023. This bill amends Employment Standard Act and the Workers' Compensation Act to ensure the online platform workers performing certain prescribed work are subject to minimum employment standards, occupation health and safety requirements, and workers' compensation protections. Subsequent regulations will establish ride-hail and food delivery workers as online platform workers under these acts, and will focus on the issues identified through Ministry of Labour's engagement as priorities for workers in this sector, such as fair compensation, pay and destination transparency, account suspensions, deactivations, and terminations, and workers' compensation and occupational health and safety coverage. Mr. Speaker, part of my mandate as Minister of Labour is to address the increasing concerns around gig economy workers. These concerns are not unique to British Columbia. Indeed, jurisdictions around the world are struggling to find ways to better protect vulnerable workers in this expanding sector. So I'm extremely proud of the work our government has done to arrive at solutions that reflect the unique needs of this sector, while preserving the flexibility that the workers in this sector enjoy and ensuring the continued viability of these services that British Columbians depend on more and more. Bill 48 also makes some small but important changes to the Employment Standards Act and the Temporary Foreign Worker Protection Act. These changes will enhance the Employment Standards Branch's operations by improving the timeliness of the dispute resolution process, while also bolstering protections for vulnerable workers. Thank you.
Member, the question is first reading of the bill. All those in favour indicate aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill be placed on the orders of the day for second reading at the next sitting of the House after today.
You have heard the question. All those in favour indicate aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Madam Clerk.
Private members' time.
Committee Chair.
Recognizing the member from Skeena.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. On behalf of Skeena, I'm honoured to rise today and speak in favour of how BC can still play a part in helping to reduce carbon emissions around the globe. In a world dealing with the need to cut down on carbon emissions while also ensuring the energy and economic requirements of their nations, LNG, liquid natural gas projects, stand out as a strong alternative. We here in BC did not fully seize our opportunity to demonstrate our commitment to delivering a reliable source of clean and ethical energy to those countries who really need it. But I firmly believe, as I did 19 years ago when we as Haisla brought the LNG initiative to BC, we can be at the forefront of this global movement towards cleaner energy if we make the right decisions now. Countries worldwide are seeking safe transitional fuels to navigate the complex challenges of the ongoing energy crisis. Now more than ever, BC has an opportunity to fully participate in its transition by investing in infrastructure and approving proposals that offer a viable alternative in the form of LNG. LNG remains as a crucial energy alternative for jurisdictions who want to move towards a carbon-neutral future. BC has always had the resources to be a global partner to meet this demand, but for one reason or another, we've been reluctant or even opposed to this idea. The approval of Cedar LNG and completion of Phase 1 of LNG Canada, while significant, are small pieces of this puzzle. For BC to be successful in supplying the world with LNG, this government needs to ensure that the necessary infrastructure is in place to support the various proposals and projects. This isn't just about economic growth. It's about ensuring BC becomes a leading hub for ethical LNG. Over the last year, there has been some advancement in specific LNG projects within the province, but given our capacity, it is not enough to supply the demands of multiple countries around the world. While these advancements are somewhat promising, they underscore the substantial electrical infrastructure that is required to facilitate the proposed electrification of the liquefaction processes. If this government is serious about being a global leader in energy production and truly wants to supply the world with a better fuel option, we need to build the LNG facilities necessary to do this, which in this case means building and approving LNG Canada's Phase 2. With global demand for natural gas growing, the approval of LNG Canada's Phase 2 would double their export capacity to 28 million tons annually. This would be incredibly beneficial to countries like Japan, who have spoken out loudly about their need for energy. Unfortunately for LNG Canada, for their project to proceed, they require significant energy. As it stands, LNG Canada intends to commence the construction of its proposed second phase utilizing natural gas-powered turbines, with the intention of transitioning to electricity if electricity becomes accessible. This strategic choice entails that the initial stages of the expansion project will yield elevated greenhouse gas emissions. BC has not reached its emissions targets, and it's predicted that this government won't reach them again. But there is a chance to at least maintain our levels if this BC government commits to making the needed investments to ensure this government gets on the right track. The gas turbine approach contradicts BC's commitment to reducing carbon emissions. With the implementation of the appropriate electrical infrastructure, we could circumvent the reliance on gas turbines, expedite the process, and better align with efforts for global emissions reductions. If the correct electrical infrastructure was in place, this project could proceed rapidly and within the correct climate goals. Running the turbines using BC's hydroelectricity to cool the gas to liquid for shipping would limit emissions, but requires at least $3 billion to upgrade the lines from Prince George to Terrace, BC alone. According to Reuters article, the CEO of LNG Canada, Jason Klein, stated, and I quote, We can't do an immediate and wholesale electrification of the plant and the pipeline. It's not possible today because the transmission infrastructure just isn't there, end quote. Klein went on to say how the decision to go ahead with phase 2 would be a no-brainer, and I quote again, if the power was there today, it would be a pretty straightforward decision, end quote. The significance of these projects goes beyond economic indicators. It's about creating good jobs, jobs that people across rural BC rely on to feed their families and pay their bills. Construction alone proved this, not only for LNG Canada, but Chevron's now defunct project. There has also been recent talks between Alberta and the federal government on utilizing Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, allowing countries to trade carbon offset credits. The aim is for Alberta and Canada to receive emission reduction credits for LNG exports, arguing that replacing coal with Canadian LNG can lead to emission reductions. Is this something that we have investigated here in BC? And if not, why are we not at the forefront of innovation to expand our LNG industry to help lower global emissions? The expansion of LNG industry is not just a better option for our environment, it's a pathway to prosperity for our communities, and without a doubt, a proven economic reconciliation action item for First Nations. We must take every opportunity we can to advance this industry in our province, whether it's pursuing emission reduction credits or building the right infrastructure to support LNG projects. I urge this House to start taking this seriously. There is a void in energy around the globe, and BC has a moral responsibility to fulfill this. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, member. Recognizing the member for Boundary Similkameen.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. I appreciate the comments from the member opposite. I will start with three different comments. One is a quote from last month by Dr. Zeke Housefather. Quote, "The first global temperature data is in for the full month of September. This month was, in my professional opinion as a climate scientist, absolutely gobsmackingly bananas. JRA 55 beat the prior monthly record by over 0.5 degrees Celsius and was around 1.8 degrees Celsius warmer than pre-industrial levels," end quote. Second point, in my conversations around British Columbia, meeting with community leaders, with local government leaders, Indigenous communities and their leaders, they're grateful for the economic pulse into their communities that oil and gas has provided, but they wish that they had been better prepared for the underestimated burden that they've been suffering with their healthcare resources, with their ground infrastructure, and their housing. And number three, in 2021, there was $18.4 trillion globally in assets under management. That is money that people have invested and wanting to see dedicated, that is tied specifically to funds that are committed to well-governed, environmentally friendly, and socially responsible investments. There is an enormous amount of funding available for investment in opportunities that are aligned with environmental health, socially responsible behavior, and good governance. And so I think it's important to iterate here, there is simply no time to waste in tackling the challenge that we're dealing with in climate change. The costs of inaction, which we have seen in the past, are enormous economically as well as socially. The threat of climate change is not decades or even years away. It's not a future what if. The impacts are all around us, from floods and wildfires to heat waves and droughts. The member brings this statement forward, perhaps unknowingly 2 years, slightly after the 2-year anniversary of the atmospheric river event that devastated so many British Columbians. And in the same year, of course, this year that we have seen, as the CBC has said, the 2023 wildfire season is now officially the most expensive and the most destructive on record. Again, the costs of inaction, not just environmentally, but socially and economically, are enormous. And then the third point, to build on that a little more, I will share also a quote from Harvard Law School Forum on Corporate Governance, Dariush Yazdani and Olin Alexander, who said, quote, spurred on by the recent landmark legislation that commits $390 billion to fight climate change, the overall direction of travel among U.S. investors is clear, even if the complexion of administration changes and some state governments continue to push back on ESG. Nearly 8 in 10 institutional investors plan to increase their allocations to ESG products over the next 10 years. What's more, nearly 9 in 10 have already rejected or stopped investing with a specific asset manager or would consider doing so due to the shortcomings in the manager's ESG investment strategies. And importantly, quote, 3/4 of institutional investors in our survey believe that ESG is now part of their fiduciary duty, end quote. This is significant because it means that investments into a greener future are now not only becoming the norm, but they are also now becoming recognized by investment managers as a fiduciary duty, as their obligation. So the business case for oil does not look good. Betting our planet, our economy in the future on carbon capture and technology to save us is risky. Coming back again to that first statement, that absolutely gobsmackingly bananas. This is a temperature increase more than 0.5 degrees higher than what we have seen on record in the past. This is dramatic. This is driven by a change in terms of El Nino, La Nina as well, which is natural, but also clearly the outcome of global emissions. We have a huge opportunity in BC with mining and critical minerals, with agriculture and regenerative agriculture practices, with forestry, a sustainable industry, mass timber, with energy in terms of investments that we've seen in battery technology and hydrogen. There are trillions of dollars on the table, and opportunities like BC are here to be able to seize that and build those good jobs, build a healthy future for what we expect to see in BC to make our province stronger and to help British Columbians socially, environmentally, and economically now and in generations to come.
Thank you. Recognizing the member for Skeena.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for their comments, and I kind of think he proved my point, although it's contradictory to what this government actually approved. LNG Canada Phase 1 is actually going to create a tremendous amount of emissions just because they can't access electricity. Now, Phase 2, there's an outside chance that Phase 2, with 14 million additional tons, will actually produce double the emissions if the infrastructure is not there. So I agree that there is a global challenge, but the key word is global. What are we doing to ensure that clean, ethical LNG comes from BC to those countries that truly need it, that can't access clean energy? We haven't done much. A lot of what we're doing now is playing catch-up. United States has beaten us to the punch, even though we started well before them. Australia, Saudi Arabia. All we've got is 1/2 of one project to provide a clean, ethical energy source to places like Japan and China. And that's all we've got. Given our capacity, our massive natural gas resources in the Peace that we can't access, we can't get at the tidewater because of so many regulations, policies, legislation that restrict us. There's a moral commitment to help out countries like Japan and China, because regardless of what we do, they're going to get energy, whether it be coal, diesel, or any other kind of dirty fuel. We're sitting on top of massive LNG reserves, but for one reason or another, we don't want to talk about how we get these massive gas reserves to Asia. Japan came here begging for an LNG agreement. They left with nothing. Right now, we've got a proposal coming from Alberta, of all places, Alberta, to ship ammonia from Alberta to Prince Rupert to export to Japan. Because Japan is shifting towards using ammonia as an energy source, as a low emissions energy source. And the only thing we need now is 2 levels of government to identify the railway line in the same manner that you identify oil and gas products being shipped by rail. That's all we really need. The world is actually transitioning to cleaner fuels in their transition to an emissions-free future. And here in BC, we are failing. And it's intentional. We are intentionally failing. And we've got to change that. And this is why I urge the House to truly consider our role in reducing global emissions.
Thank you, Member.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Recognizing the member for Maple Ridge Mission.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Speaker. So, Honourable Speaker, when I think about investing in tomorrow, I can't help but think about the incredible things the government's done over the last 6 years to prepare British Columbia for the new economy, whether that's in tech, whether that's in life sciences, whether that's in biomanufacturing, agriculture and agri-tech, quantum computing, or clean energy. For example, the new NBC Investment Corporation is a strategic investment fund created by the province of British Columbia with $500 million to invest in growing companies and venture funds to benefit British Columbia. Now, this has a triple bottom line mandate to invest for financial profit as well as social and environmental impacts. It's currently investing in growing innovative companies looking for an equity investment, and this means keeping BC innovation and companies who want to scale up here in British Columbia as opposed to leaving the province. Now, last week, NBC invested $4 million in 4AG Robotics, which was formerly TechBrew Robotics, and $5 million in Clarius Mobile Health Corporation, and previously invested $10 million in Amplitude Ventures Fund 2 and $10 million in Pender Technologies Inflection Fund 2 venture funds supporting BC-based companies. This is really exciting. And last week, Honourable Speaker, the government announced provincial funding of $16.47 million in HTEC's BC pilot hydrogen truck project. And this project aims to tackle decarbonization challenges by facing BC's commercial transportation sector by procuring and piloting 6 different heavy-duty hydrogen fuel cell trucks. And it includes upgrading filling stations and maintenance facilities as well. And this pilot project hopes to kickstart the use of low-carbon hydrogen in commercial trucking. Really exciting work, Honourable Speaker. And this also builds on the exciting investments from last May, if members remember, in Abceleron. The Government of Canada and British Columbia are investing in a made-in-BC anchor company to expand Vancouver's investment and solve global healthcare challenges while creating hundreds of new high-paying jobs. But of course, Honourable Speaker, this exciting, sustainable economy is going to need a lot of skilled workers. And in fact, it's estimated that the province is going to need over 1 million new workers, and many of those are going to require post-secondary and trades training, Honourable Speaker. And that's why the Stronger BC Future Ready Action Plan is being put into action to meet the challenges that we have today and also make sure that we're ready to succeed and grow the economy into the future. Now, we've invested, Honourable Speaker, over $100 million a year into trades education through the Skills Trades BC. And Skills Trades BC manages nearly 90 trades programs in BC, from carpenters to electricians to plumbers, 48 of which are Red Seal programs. And the province has also invested in new trading facilities at Okanagan College, Selkirk, North Island, in the Nicola Valley Institute of Technology. Also, new trades training building is being built at BCIT, which will benefit 12,000 students who will benefit from that. And also the Vancouver Community College Centre for Clean Energy and Automotive Innovation, $271 million, Honourable Speaker, in provincial funding. Now, on the technology front, more students are getting access to in-demand programs with more than 3,000 seats with technology-relevant spaces for post-secondary. And these, Honourable Speaker, will range from cybersecurity, software engineering, data sciences, life sciences, creative tech, clean tech, and agri-tech, all the things we're talking about the future. And these are all part, again, of the Future Ready program. And of course, Honourable Speaker, in addition to all this, we need apprentices. Apprentices are a great way to build our skilled workforce for the future. And November is Apprenticeship Recognition Month. And this is an opportunity to really celebrate the hardworking apprentices and employers who are working in this program. In fact, there's 41,000 registered apprenticeships, over 10,000 youth program participants, and nearly 4,800 foundation students in BC. And it's important to note that 10% of these apprentices are women, and 8.5% of these apprentices are Indigenous as of September 23rd. And we know that there's a shortage of skilled labor, and we really need, we in fact, Honourable Speaker, expect approximately 83,000 job openings in the BC trades through to 2032. So it's very, very important that we do this work. But training takes time. And it's also very important to acknowledge that there's a lot of people coming from other countries who have skills, who need those credentials to be recognized. And so for far too long, the recognition protest has taken too long for folks who are coming in, and we need people now. And that's why the International Credentials Recognition Act is being put in to remove unfair barriers and increase transparency and streamline these this international training. So important to move forward. Now, we're continuing to diversify our economy by embracing new technologies in traditional industries, Honourable Speaker, like forestry with mass timber, or agriculture with agritech, or mining with the circular economy or recycling, and new cleaner practices. And Honourable Speaker, growing these new industries is so important because we need to move towards a clean energy future. We need to look at challenges that the pandemic brought us, for example, in life sciences. We need to make transformative changes in things like quantum computing and be a leader in those things. And the Stronger BC Act, the plan is setting the stage for this, Honourable Speaker, so that BC can in fact be a world leader in so many of these different areas. So, Honourable Speaker, I'm really excited about the future of British Columbia in the new economy and the things that we need to do and are doing to make sure that we're investing in all of the important technology and quantum computing and agritech and all of those things that will be our future in order that we can diversify and continue to diversify our economy into the future. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Thank you, member. Recognizing the member for Kamloops North Thompson.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm happy to rise to speak to the motion around investing in, or the statement in investing in tomorrow. And I would just point out a couple of observations from the member's opposite's speech there. That it was interesting to me that it started with NBC, which is that high-risk venture capital scheme the government created a few years ago. We're about 3 years down the road now with that high-risk venture capital scheme. It's good to hear there's finally been what it sounds like about $29 million worth of investment finally out the door after 3 years of several hundreds of thousands of dollars a year going to pay for the administration of a fund that had yet to make investments. But fundamentally, we absolutely need to be looking about tomorrow and investing in tomorrow and the jobs that are needed. Unfortunately, what we've seen over the last 6 to 7 years is that for every 5 public sector jobs that have been created, we've only seen 1 private sector job created. There does need to be the ability for the private sector to radically get on board with the economy again in British Columbia, and that has been lacking. And so when you look at the Clean BC scheme that has currently been marketed by this government over the last 7 years, I would suggest to the members opposite, they actually read into some of their own government documents that shows actually what is slated to happen under that Clean BC scheme between now and 2030. Because at full implementation, what we will see, and this is work by 2 highly respected economists in British Columbia, Ken Peacock and Jock Finlayson, working directly off of government documents, not creating their own documents, not creating their own algorithms of looking at information, but literally government documents publicly available on government websites, which very clearly shows a shrinking of the provincial economy to the tune of $28.6 billion a year and a loss of $11,000 per year on household incomes to British Columbians per year. So that's a significant hit, but it also shows a loss, a net loss of almost $250,000 jobs in British Columbia. And so when the member talks about forestry and mining, actually the Clean BC scheme is slated to actually remove net close to 10,000 jobs in forestry and mining. It will remove over 20,000 jobs in the transportation sector. It will remove almost 15,000 jobs in other sectors as well, around forestry, around resources, and that is critical because that affects large geographic areas of our province, but it also impacts the financial areas in and around the Lower Mainland and the large corporations that work and base themselves out of Vancouver. So if we're looking to the future, we have to look at the net and we have to look at the government policies in regards to whether or not it's actually truly helping to invigorate an economy. You can't simply say we've invested in one aspect of it, so everything's fine, we're looking forward to tomorrow. You need to make sure that as a government, there's those investments being made and policy being developed that will not only protect and see emissions drive down, but actually see employment ramp up. Unfortunately, under the Clean BC scheme, what's become very apparent, again, with government's own documents and government's own information that they have collected, that they seem to be either willfully turning a blind eye to or ignoring, is that we will see the opposite. We will see an incredible drag on our economy. We will see emissions continuing to rise, as we've seen over the last 7 years in British Columbia. And the net result is that if you're lucky enough to keep your job, you will see a household income drop of $11,000 a year. And if you're not lucky enough to keep your job, that means you're one of the almost 250,000 people in this province that will find themselves out of work due directly to failed policies and a reliance on not trying to adapt and make sure we're actually being innovative. And probably the best example of that is the start of the member opposite's comments when he talked about the NBC high-risk venture capital scheme. The fact it took government almost 3 years from times that they announced this high-risk venture capital scheme to actually start to invest in projects tells you that there is not the significant urgency to developing a way forward for the future of tomorrow in British Columbia, and that is a problem, Madam Chair. So thank you for the time.
Thank you, member. Recognizing the member for Maple Ridge Mission.
Well, thank you, Honourable Speaker. And it was an incredible week last week in Maple Ridge. We heard from TransLink that Maple Ridge has been selected for the first of the 3 bus rapid transit projects that's being developed. And this is exciting new technology that will link Maple Ridge to the new Langley SkyTrain station. And I really want to take a moment to thank Mayor Rumi and Council for advocating to Mayor's Council and TransLink to get this amazing announcement, creating lasting and transformative change for the future of our region. And I can't talk about investing in the future without talking about the biggest investment in Maple Ridge history. It's incredibly exciting. It's dealing with innovative clean energy manufacturing. There was a huge announcement last week, Honourable Speaker, with the Prime Minister and the Premier in Maple Ridge. The province is partnering with the Government of Canada to anchor E1 Moly, a global leader in clean technology, to bring manufacturing to British Columbia. Now, for decades, Honourable Speaker, E1 Moly has been operating an R&D facility in Maple Ridge. And it's incredible how this tiny Canadian battery lab from the 1980s has become a central global player in the lithium battery development race. Now, it's been this company's dream, Honourable Speaker, to bring battery manufacturing to Canada. Now, with this announcement, E1 Moly will fulfill this dream and bring innovative lithium-ion battery cell production to Maple Ridge, creating over 450 highly skilled jobs and helping to grow the province's green economy and provide sustainable employment for BC. Now, this is a $1 billion partnership and is another example of how we're leveraging BC's strengths to build a stronger, cleaner, more inclusive economy with quality jobs for people so they can live good, secure lives in communities they call home. And with this the strong mining sector that supplies critical minerals needed for this clean economy, these types of innovative companies can continue to work in this clean energy solution. Now, E1 Moly will establish Western Canada's first high-performance lithium-ion battery cell manufacturing facility, creating a new hub in North America for this battery component supply chain. And this builds, Honourable Speaker, on the Stronger BC Economic Plan around clean growth and supports our Clean BC Roadmap to 2030 in transitioning to a cleaner economy. And through partnerships like this, Honourable Speaker, BC and Maple Ridge are demonstrating that we are open for business, and that is why why companies are choosing our province as an attractive place to invest, anchor, create jobs, and set down roots with their families. Through the Stronger BC Economic Plan, we're building a stronger, cleaner economy that will work for the people of today and the future, and we're going to make sure that people have the skills that they need to keep our businesses and our province strong moving forward. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Thank you, member. Recognizing the member for Abbotsford West.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. So, speaking of last week, I was in my car driving across the Mission Bridge over to the Save On Food store to pick up my $8 dozen eggs. And so I'm driving my 35-year-old car, listening to my 1980s car, listening to my 1970s music, and I hit the button on my 8-track, and who should come on but Joni Mitchell? And the song is Big Yellow Taxi. Released in the 70s, early 70s, might have been 1970. If they released it today, it would be Big Black Uber, right? Because it's times have changed. But there's a famous line in the song, and it became kind of an anthem for the ecological movement that was developing about paving paradise and putting up a parking lot. But that's not the line actually that got my attention, because there's a line just before, just after that, where she sings, "Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? You don't know what you've got till it's gone." And that got me thinking about something that's been bothering me, and happily I have the privilege to come in here and get a few things, express my concerns and get a few things off my chest. And that's this notion of the importance and the power of a strong private sector economy and private sector job creation, Madam Chair. And I think we're losing the narrative. And I have to say this in the short time available to me today. I have this belief, and if people fundamentally disagree with this belief or this bias, they're not going to like what I have to say. But it is this, that government has largely three priorities. One, to preserve public safety, protect members of the public. Two, to look after those who are not in a position to look after themselves. And then thirdly, to create a climate in which people can come here, people, businesses, invest and create opportunity. And I confess that is rooted in the belief that it is ultimately the private sector that will generate the wealth that will flow through to people, and eventually the government to allow government to address those three priorities. But there seems to be a growing notion, at least in some quarters in this House, that the engine that's going to drive the economy is government itself. And I'm concerned about that. Because from where I sit and from what I've seen in the past, it doesn't work. When we look at the numbers that we have seen, I think over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen somewhere in the neighborhood of 24,000 private sector jobs created. We've seen a lot more created in the public sector compared to a 5-year period between 2012, 2017, when upwards of 250,000 private sector jobs were created and generated wealth that governments could put to work addressing the three priority areas that I mentioned. What we're seeing is not sustainable. And, Madam Chair, I'm worried about where all this is going to lead. We're now, as the private sector, when we look at the projects, the marquee projects that have employed thousands of people, whether it's a Site C energy project, an LNG energy product, an energy transmission project. These are significant job creation projects, Madam Speaker. They're ones that the present government inherited, in most cases spoke in opposition to. But what's coming next? What's coming after? What's coming after those projects? Where is that private sector job creation going to come? If we look at the last 3 or 4 years as any indication, it looks rather bleak. And at the end of the day, people are going to pay a price for that, Madam Speaker. You know, the finance minister says we're looking at a deficit this year of $6.5 billion. $6.5 billion. We haven't seen anything like that. And, you know, and there was a time when I sat in government, and after 2008, we ran some deficits. The world economy faltered badly, and to sustain services, we borrowed money. But, Madam Speaker, we then paid that money back. And by the time we got to 2017 and then later to COVID, British Columbia could boast a strong economy and a strong set of books. But where are we going to be when the next global cataclysm hits? The unwillingness to address that fundamental question of generating private sector investment, private sector jobs, and the wealth that goes with it, and instead simply running massive governmental deficits at the end of the day strikes me, and I'll say this, as a selfish way to govern. Because the people that are making those decisions and taking the credit for expending those billions of dollars that we don't have know one thing, Madam Speaker. They won't be here to clean up the mess. That'll be left to someone else. So the equation is out of balance right now. And I'm not optimistic that we'll see that imbalance redressed, but I am pleased to have been able to take advantage of the opportunity to point out my concern in this chamber on this.
Thank you, member. Recognizing the member for Langford, Wanda Fuca.
Oh, thanks very much, Madam Speaker, and thanks to the member from Abbotsford West for his comments this morning. Thank you for making me feel so young. I am looking forward to Googling who Joni Mitchell is after these comments. And I would add that maybe the member for Abbotsford West and I could create a shared Spotify playlist. I think people would appreciate two generations coming together. But happy to send some information to the member about Spotify or Apple Music or whatever he may choose to use. Mr. Speaker, or Madam Speaker, thanks so much for the opportunity to be able to rise and talk about the value of the private sector. And I want to start by thanking the member across for sharing his perspectives, for sharing the perspectives of the priorities that he sees in the role of government. And I tend to agree with him. It is the role of government to protect people. And you protect people and you make sure that you provide the services people need, and you create an investment climate that leads to private sector jobs being created. And certainly my colleague from Maple Ridge Mission talked about the $1 billion investment that was announced in his community last week. But the issue that I take with the comments across the way from the BC United is the fact that this characterization that public sector jobs don't matter. And what I would add, and the belief that I carry in this House and the belief that I carry in my community, is that a strong public sector leads to an even stronger private sector. That's a belief that I have. And I would add that we've certainly had a time when another party sat on this side of the House where they had a different belief, where public sector jobs were gutted. And I only have to look to my own family and the impact that that had as a son of immigrants who came here and became healthcare workers and were laid off and their jobs privatized, and the impact that that had on me personally and so many families. But Mr. Speaker, or Madam Speaker, the value of private sector jobs comes with a strong investment in public sector jobs, and it makes sure that we're hiring more teachers, make sure we're hiring more doctors and nurses. And this government, the government that I'm proud to be a member of, is unapologetic of the fact that we've been making record investments in the services that people need each and every day. And we're going to continue to do that as long as we sit on this side of the House. But at the same time, we're going to continue to make investments to ensure that British Columbia is a place worth investing in. And again, the member from Maple Ridge talked about $1 billion investment announced in his community last week. We only have to look a few months ago to another substantive investment in Vancouver, Abcelera, a life sciences company with the support of the provincial and federal government that is going to be creating hundreds of jobs, hundreds of good-paying jobs in Vancouver. And again, another investment with the support of our government is the BC Jobs and Manufacturing Plan that has led to millions of dollars being spent in partnership with the private sector to create good-paying jobs. It requires government working with the private sector to be able to create those jobs. It requires creating an atmosphere, an investment climate that leads to the private sector wanting to make those investments. And we've had that track record in this government. In October, as part of the Labour Force survey results coming out, we saw 23,400 full-time jobs added, with over half of those jobs coming from the construction sector. That's fantastic news for communities like Langford-Wanda Fuca, where we've got a strong construction sector with people working in building housing, working in building public services, and also important infrastructure that we all rely on to keep us moving, while also leading to new private sector jobs. I'll just quickly highlight that for Langford this year, the last couple of years, in fact, since the pandemic, has been record years of small business startups. And that's something that I know that the Mayor and Council are very proud of, the community is very proud of, and the community is supporting those small businesses. But Madam Speaker, I'm sorry, Madam Speaker, I'm so used to what I'm getting up speaking, saying Mr. Speaker, and I apologize for that. Madam Speaker, it is so important that when we talk about creating a strong economy, when we talk about investing in our communities, that we also talk about the value of public sector jobs. And I certainly hope when the member from Abbotsford West gets up that he talks about the value of those public sector jobs and how a strong public sector economy will turn into an even stronger private sector economy. Thanks very much.
Thank you, member. Recognizing the member for Abbotsford West.
Thanks, Honourable Chair. And I begin by alerting the Honourable Member. I just got a telex message telling me that Counting Crows did a remake on Big Yellow Taxi. So the song has lurched its way into his playlist one way or another. Look, I don't think anyone is going to quarrel, least of all me, with the importance of the work undertaken by folks in the public sector in delivering on all of those three objectives that I mentioned. But it does behoove us, I believe, to ask a couple of fundamental questions, or at least acknowledge a couple of fundamental things, and that is, they have to be paid. They don't work for free. And where does the money come from to pay those dedicated public sector workers and to provide those important public sector services? That money comes from wealth generated by a vibrant private sector economy. You know, we hear this, and I certainly do, and I accept the importance of looking after people, particularly vulnerable people who need some assistance. But I say, Honourable Chair, that obligation doesn't just exist today, that obligation exists in perpetuity. And if governments at any particular time, take steps that compromises the ability of future governments and future societies to address those objectives and those priorities, then that government is doing a disservice. And I fear that is what is taking place. Look, it is way more popular and way more fun to say yes and write a check. But when the temptation to do that takes over to a degree that leads to what we are now seeing, which is ongoing, perpetual, multi-billion-dollar deficits, the ability future societies and future governments are going to have to deliver on those objectives is most assuredly being compromised. And it won't be anyone in this chamber that has to pay that price. And that's why I think it's selfish. Short-term, convenient in the short term, probably, but ultimately not very visionary. But that is a debate I expect that will go on for some time, and certainly through the next month leading up to the next contest, electoral contest. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Recognizing the member for Surrey White Rock.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I seek leave to make a quick introduction.
Is leave granted? Please say aye.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We are joined in this House by a very important constituent of mine, somebody who's ultimately responsible for me being here today in every way. That constituent is my mom. It's her first time that she's been here today, so welcome, Mom, and look forward to spending the day with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Recognizing the member for Richmond, Steveston.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I'm pleased to be speaking today from Lekwungen Territory, that is the nations of the Songhees and Esquimalt. It's always a privilege to be here. All workers in BC should have a safe and fair workplace so that they can have a good life and support their loved ones. Our government is taking action to support worker health and safety, improve fair workplace standards, and instate meaningful protections for vulnerable workers. Every worker should come home safe at the end of their shift, but protections for workers fell short of what was needed, so our government stepped up. Can you believe that before 2017, children as young as 12 could be allowed to do practically any kind of job? As a mother and a human being, that's quite frankly appalling that BC was so far behind international standards for child employment. We had to take action. In 2019, legislative changes raised the general working age from 12 to 16, and this was followed by regulations defining light work that's appropriate for those under 16. In this province, you must now be at least 18 for jobs such as logging, oil drilling, or work in smelters. Kind of sounds like a no-brainer. Young workers are tragically more likely to be injured or killed in the workplace, and setting these standards ensures that kids are kept out of workplaces that are dangerous for them. Asbestos can be deadly, and workers needed better protections to avoid permanent injury or death as a result of their work in abatement. We amended the Workers' Compensation Act, so asbestos abatement contractors who operate in BC must be licensed by January 1st, 2024, and asbestos abatement workers and others complete mandatory asbestos safety training. BC will be the first jurisdiction in Canada to implement a licensing requirement, and I hope, on behalf of all workers in this industry, that we are not the last. Firefighters put their health and lives on the line to keep us all safe, and we need to better support them, and by extension, their families, if they are faced with a cancer diagnosis. In recognition of the higher risk of work-related cancers among firefighters, the province amended the Firefighters' Occupational Disease Regulation under the Workers' Compensation Act by adding 5 cancers to the list of existing 13 cancers that firefighters are at risk of developing. We added ovarian, cervical, penile, pancreatic, and thyroid. These changes streamline access to workers' compensation benefits for firefighters, eliminating the stress of proving that the listed cancers are work-related. Health and safety considerations are also intersectional. which means that we consider the multifaceted impacts of identity, like religion or gender. In 2021, our government announced that WorkSafe BC was implementing changes to BC's occupational health and safety regulation, requiring employers to conduct risk assessments for workplaces when considering the need for safety headgear, while ensuring that turban-wearing Sikhs will be able to participate more fully in the workforce. Adequate toilet facilities are also a barrier to employment in the trades, and the Premier recently announced that flush toilets will be required on job sites with 25 workers or more. Better sanitation will improve worker health, but also, and very importantly, remove a barrier for people who menstruate. Messy, portable chemical toilets and inadequate hand cleaning stations kept menstruating people from pursuing or remaining in the trades, because these conditions are inadequate to meeting their basic biological needs. Keeping workers safe doesn't just mean protecting their physical well-being. In 2019, we expanded the mental health presumption to include nurses, emergency dispatchers, and publicly funded healthcare aides, and will review criteria to add other occupations in the future. The mental health presumption recognizes that people in these occupations care for us on some of our worst days, and can need mental health care as a result of the work they do. Workers who have had a workplace injury shouldn't find barriers to returning to work. Starting January 1st of 2024, new requirements under the Workers' Compensation Act in British Columbia will require employers and injured workers to cooperate with WorkSafe BC to facilitate the injured workers' return to their workplace, either in a pre-injury job, a comparable position, or other suitable work. Employers will be required to make necessary changes to the work or workplace to accommodate that worker. This year, our government announced nearly $12 million in funding for the Employment Standards Branch over 3 years. This will provide for as many as 33 additional full-time employees to be hired to meet the growing demand for the branch's services. Increasing ESB staff is important, but so is improving the way that it provides services. To that end, we've begun modernizing the Employment Standard Branch so that workers in British Columbia have the supports they need, while giving the branch the tools to track, investigate, and penalize employers who don't comply. We've also made it easier for workers to get help when their rights have been violated by eliminating the self-help kit, which was identified as a significant barrier to accessing assistance from ESB. Under our government, WorkSafe has hired more prevention and investigations officers, stepping up inspections, and issuing more citations, fines, and penalties. We all want workplaces to be safe for workers, and preventing unsafe working conditions and imposing consequences for violating safe workplace rules is an important piece of the puzzle to protect workers. Worker well-being isn't just one thing. It is a collection of actions that together lift up the dignity, health, and safety of workers in British Columbia. Our government puts people first. People build this province to be a better place to live, work, learn, and play every single day. And we owe it to them, to all of us, to make sure that we have their backs.
Member for Shuswap.
Well, thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. I'm pleased to rise in the House today and speak on the importance of worker well-being in British Columbia, and I thank the member opposite for bringing forward this topic for discussion here today. Workers are essential to growing our province as they build our homes, take care of our loved ones in hospitals, and educate our children. We must ensure that the government provides support to ensure the well-being of workers and unleashes the potential of our workforce. We need workers more than ever in our province. As our population continues to grow, the demand for critical infrastructure such as schools, hospitals, and housing is surging. But concerningly, we are failing to meet that demand. Equally concerning is the reality that most BC major infrastructure projects across the province continue to go over budget and are subjected to significant delays. A key factor in these delays is the so-called community benefits agreements that dictate the terms of these projects and the fact that they exclude workers, contractors, and Indigenous businesses that want to be involved. They want to be working, earning a paycheck, and benefiting their communities, but the CBAs restrict anyone who is not a member of one of the government's supported unions. Discrimination. It's important to realize, Honourable Speaker, that workers are consumers too, and life in BC has never been more unaffordable. The cost of living crisis in BC continues to get workers and people everywhere that are feeling the pinch. Everyday errands like buying groceries and filling your car with gas are met with shock and frustration as prices continue to climb. Half of British Columbians are $200 or less away from not being able to pay their bills at the end of each month. We've seen nearly a 60% increase in food bank use, with 62,000 children relying on food banks monthly. British Columbia has the highest rents in Canada and the most expensive housing in North America. People are living paycheck to paycheck and struggling to keep up as their real income drops and essential costs soar. The growing costs and blizzard of new taxes affect workers across BC, no matter the field of work or corner of the province they live in. The number one way that we can support our workers and raise their well-being is by making life less expensive. People across BC need to drive to get to and from work, whether it's commuting downtown to an hour-long drive to their work site. Needing a vehicle is a necessity in many parts of British Columbia, especially in my riding of Shuswap and rural parts of the province. British Columbians do not have the same options in transit that are accessible to those in Metro Vancouver. Many jobs require reliable methods of transportation, and in these communities, their only option is a personal vehicle. Right now, British Columbia has the highest gas prices and taxes in North America. The pain at the pump is hurting British Columbians, as many families have to choose between filling up their tanks or putting food on the table for their kids. Eliminating the provincial fuel tax is one way this government could support the well-being of workers, a tangible way to reduce not only the cost of gas, but also groceries and all goods transported by truck. Another way to support workers in BC is to create more jobs. The best way to protect workers is to ensure that they have jobs to actually go to each and every day. Private sector job creation has completely flatlined over the last 7 years. And investment in our province has all but dried up. We must build a growing and prosperous economy that creates good-paying jobs across the province for workers in all sectors. A strong economy allows us to invest in the social services needed to support individuals, families, and communities in need. Now, Honourable Speaker, the member opposite shared about the investments in the Employment Standards Branch. Well, the Employment Standards Branch has actually been an absolute failure under this current government. Wait times in 2017 were 2 months. A private sector worker that may be jilted or have an argument or complaint with their employee would reach out to the Employment Services Branch. The wait time in 2017, Honourable Speaker, 2 months. That wait list, that wait time, that backlog has now grown to over 16 months. 16 months. Is that disrespectful? Is that supporting workers by requiring a worker to wait as much as 16 months before their claim is actually even heard by the Employment Standards Branch? Far too little, far too late, Honourable Speaker. Supporting the well-being of workers is very important, as we need to ensure to build a strong economy and a strong future for both our children and our grandchildren. I hope everyone in this House can recognize the strength our workers provide to our economy, and that we need to be investing all that we can to ensure that we have a prosperous province where workers can afford to live. Thank you,
Member. Member for Richmond-Steveston.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Our government has done so much to ensure that workers have access to fair and safe workplaces. Vulnerable workers have needed us to have their backs, and we have. Did you know that most minimum wage earners are women, and many of those have dependent children? Minimum wage earners are also more likely to be racialized. Workers' intersecting identities contribute very much to the type of work they can access and their wage. We've raised minimum wage every year since 2017, lifting up women and children, and our province now has a minimum wage of $16.75 per hour, so that workers are not left behind. We've also phased out the discriminatory liquor server wage, which affected mostly women. Women reported being vulnerable to harassment and assault due to their dependence on customer tips, and having a fair minimum wage improves their economic and personal security. Women still earn substantially less than men, with Indigenous and racialized women experiencing the largest pay gap. We've brought in pay transparency legislation to address the gender pay gap and ensure equal pay for equal work. It will achieve this by requiring all publicly advertised jobs in British Columbia to include transparent wage and salary information. Workers experiencing serious and life-altering personal circumstances should have protected leave to return to their job. Up to 5 days per year paid leave was made available for employees who face domestic or sexual violence or are parents of a child impacted by this kind of violence, along with legislation to provide those employees with more job protection. In 2018, we provided longer, more flexible job-protected pregnancy and parental leaves for people caring for a terminally ill family member or coping with the death or disappearance of a child. People deserve to be cared for with compassion and respect when dealing with these kinds of life events. Our government is making sure that those folks can have peace of mind that their employment is protected while they are on their necessary leave. Our government is soliciting feedback on proposed solutions to enhance working conditions for app-based ride-hailing and food delivery workers, addressing concerns such as low and unpredictable pay, worker safety, and compensation for job-related injuries. When people work in the gig economy, workers are vulnerable to unilateral employment decisions and substandard working conditions. App-based workers are often racialized or new immigrants who are facing barriers to traditional employment. We need to make sure that we are looking after workers that need the help of a level playing field. There are so many more actions that this government has taken so that this province is a place where workers are confident that they will have a good workplace and be able to earn a fair wage. We've come a long way since 2017, and whether you're a nurse, an electrician, a childcare worker, or a ride-hail driver, and any and all jobs in between, this government has your back.
Thank you, Member. Acting Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I ask the House consider proceeding with motion number 58, standing in the name for the member for Peace River North.
Thank you. Members, unanimous consent of the House is required to proceed to motion 58 without disturbing the priorities of the motions preceding it on the order paper. If any member is opposed to the request for leave, please indicate now. Leave has been granted. Recognize the member for Peace River North to move the motion. Member.
Thanks, Honourable Speaker. I'm pleased to rise in the House today to move the following motion. Be it resolved that this House supports permanently eliminating the provincial fuel tax to ease the pain at the pump and removing the carbon tax on all home heating. Honourable Speaker, after 7 years, 2 terms of this government, life in British Columbia has never been more expensive. People are struggling and feeling that no matter how hard they work, they just cannot keep up with the rising costs to live here in British Columbia. Half of all British Columbians, Honourable Speaker, are $200 or less away from being able to pay their monthly bills. From gas to groceries to housing, costs continue to soar while paychecks continue to shrink. The NDP's middle class squeeze has made British Columbia the least affordable province in Canada, if not jurisdiction across the continent. BC is home to the highest gas prices in all of North America. It hasn't always been this way. When the NDP government came into power in 2017, the average cost of gas in Vancouver was $1.30 a litre, and that price had been relatively stable for the preceding 6 years. The skyrocketing prices that we are seeing today show just how affordable life has become after the 7 years and 2 terms of this NDP government. Far too many British Columbians are now forced to decide between filling up their car with gas, driving their kids to school, putting healthy food on their table, or even being able to afford a medication. We have seen nearly a 60% increase in food bank use, with 62,000 children relying on food banks monthly. Enough is enough, Honourable Speaker. People deserve a break. Our BC United Caucus has spent months calling on the government to take action on this affordability crisis and deliver results for British Columbians. Unfortunately, the NDP has refused to take our suggestions and, as a result, has led our province further down the path of unaffordability. That's why our BC United Caucus had put forward a bold plan to make life more affordable, a plan that includes ending the pain at the pumps permanently by eliminating the provincial gas tax. People need to get to work, to school, and to drive to doctor's appointments. Axing this tax will save drivers up to 15 cents a litre on gas and diesel. For the average family in my community, that'll be around 20 bucks savings at the pump. For a pickup, that'd be around 30 bucks. Imagine what families could do with an extra 30 bucks in their pocket every week. This will make a real difference in people's lives immediately. The reality, Mr. Speaker, is that many British Columbians need to drive to work or school or these medical appointments. They need to take their kids to hockey practices, check in on their parents or their grandparents, driving to the store to get groceries. British Columbians in rural areas do not have transit options that are accessible to those like in Metro Vancouver or larger centres. In fact, some of these communities, like Fort Nelson, don't even have transit options at all. Unfortunately, we seem to be punishing those for living in rural BC. In my riding, Peace River North, as well as in my colleagues' Peace River South, for many other across the north, we drive hours in our vehicles as a necessity. Many people require reliable methods of transportation for their job. And with drastic weather changes that occur with little notice, a personal vehicle is the only way my constituents can get around reliably. It's time to give the people of the Peace Country a break, as well as all of those that live across British Columbia, by eliminating this provincial gas tax. Not only does this policy make filling up your vehicle cheaper, but it reduces the cost of all goods and services that depend on gas or diesel powered transportation. And up in the Peace Country, all goods are trucked. Lowering these costs will help make life more affordable across the north. Eliminating the provincial gas tax is a tangible first step in delivering a more affordable province for all British Columbians. We know that these savings will be directly passed on to consumers. In fact, an independent study at the University of Calgary found that when Alberta removed their provincial sales tax, it was fully passed on to 98% of Albertans. The vast majority of people received an immediate cost of living benefit from this measure. But you know what, Honourable Speaker, I can't see the NDP supporting this motion. In fact, even this weekend at their NDP convention, a motion to provide a little bit of tax relief to British Columbians was voted down. Shame. You know, at the end of the day, it is results that matter, and this plan of ours will put more money in British Columbians' pockets, where it belongs.
Thank you, Member. Member for Langley East.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and thank you to the member of the opposition for their comments. And I think there's a couple things that we can agree on. You know, the first one being that no, we're not likely to support their motion, and partially because I mean, even their leader wouldn't support their motion. And secondly, that it is expensive for families. We are aware of the fact that there is high prices at the pump. We are aware of the fact that people are facing real challenges, and that's why our government's taking and has taken. If I know the member is not able to, you know, resist lashing out, but if he waits for just a second, I'll finish my sentence. You know, our government is taking consistent action to help address the costs of living for people in British Columbia. And people in British Columbia are also really concerned about the very real costs of the climate crisis, which we've seen here in British Columbia with fires, floods, droughts, and extreme heat. And our focus is on reducing costs for people, taking measurable steps for British Columbians to reduce their costs. And in listening to the member of opposition speak to this motion, I'm absolutely flummoxed, completely perplexed by this motion brought forward by opposition, because quite frankly, it's either disingenuous or it's just plain misinformed. And, but further, what I think everyone in this House would really like to know is if the real leader of the BC United Party could please put their hand up, because it appears quite often that the members and their leader that's identified on their flow chart don't agree. Their thoughts don't match. So some examples of that are that Kevin Falcon himself has said that, cutting the carbon
no
tax...
name, member, we don't use names.
Oh, sorry. The leader of the opposition himself, well, I agree, the opposition does do that. Also, those rules don't apply to opposition. If we eliminate the carbon tax, of course, you would see a double-digit increase in both small business taxes and personal income taxes. 2 days later, on August 17, 2012, he wrote a letter to the editor in the province. Eliminating the carbon taxes you suggest would create a revenue shortfall of over $1 billion a year. We would need to raise other taxes to balance the budget, which would mean a 15% increase in personal income tax or an increase of 40% or more in corporate income taxes. Then himself said that cancelling the carbon tax would be a terrible mistake. So on June 28, 2012, said, I think cancelling the carbon tax, my personal opinion, it would be a terrible mistake. I think that if people believe that climate change is an issue, that the warming of the planet is an issue, the only sensible way to deal with that is pricing carbon. And even if what the leader of the opposition said isn't enough, perhaps looking at an example of what happened in Alberta, they admitted that the oil companies had hiked prices. Over 10 days, the gas price advantage Albertans have enjoyed relative to other provinces has disappeared, and it now appears Albertans no longer are benefiting from the tax cut. With Alberta no longer collecting fuel taxes at the pump, Albertans deserve to know why they are suddenly paying as much for gasoline as motorists in Toronto, when as recently as 2 weeks ago they were paying less. So, Honourable Speaker, we are taking measurable steps to lower the costs for British Columbians. In terms of the $30 a month the member opposite mentioned, just with the $500 a year from the reduced premiums, by reducing them by an average of $500 a year, has put $41.66 back in the pockets of British Columbians. We also saw the bold plan, these knee-jerk reactions. We're just going to cut this tax. Well, we saw this plan. We saw the fire sale of lands, which we're buying back today. We saw as health minister a cut of $360 million from hospitals, as transportation minister bringing in tolls, as finance minister hiking ICBC rates in the MSP. We watched the hydro rates skyrocket by 80% when opposition was in power. We saw cutting services and increasing fees. So we know what happens with a bold plan by the opposition. It costs British Columbians more. Talking about your
Members?
leader.
Thank you, member.
That's just a few examples.
Thank you, member.
And appreciate the opportunity, but we'll continue taking measurable steps to save British Columbians money.
Member for Kootenay East.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Well, just in comments to the previous speaker, if you want to talk about the ultimate flip-flop, we've got ministers in this legislature right now that campaigned fully on axing the tax of the carbon tax. And now they're doubling down. Actually, they're tripling down, as we're going to see the carbon tax get to 170 by 2030. But I'm enthusiastic to rise today and express my full support to the elimination of the provincial gas tax and the removal of carbon tax on all home heating. British Columbians continue to struggle with the cost of living crisis, and the NDP's introduction of 30 new and increased taxes has not helped. It's in the billions of dollars, Honourable Speaker. From gas to groceries, from healthcare to housing, it is crystal clear that the NDP's layering of billions of dollars of taxes is making affordability unachievable, and that BC once again stands for bring cash to anyone that wants to live here. In this House, we should be doing everything we can to lower the financial pressures people in BC are facing, not adding to their ever-growing costs that cause major stress in their daily lives. If there is action we can take to reduce the burden on BC families, we should take it immediately. That is why the BC United Caucus has proposed these common sense initiatives that will put money back into the pockets of British Columbians as soon as they are enacted, and that includes the elimination of the fuel tax at the pump. Now, it is important to note that the NDP has not been accurately representing the impacts of eliminating the provincial gas tax. Some of the members opposite have even suggested that eliminating the tax would not result in significant savings for the drivers. However, studies by leading economists such as the University of Calgary's Trevor Thome reveals just the opposite. Professor Thome's independent analysis demonstrated that the tax relief resulting from the suspension of the gas tax in Alberta was, quote, fully passed through, end quote, in both 2022 and 2023. An astounding 98% of Albertans experienced a cost of living benefit from this tax suspension. It's not a matter of opinion, Honourable Speaker, but it's a matter of fact that is supported by data. Eliminating this tax in BC will directly help people across the province. I know many in my riding, especially those relying on trucks to navigate the snow and conduct their businesses during the winter, would benefit significantly from the elimination of the provincial gas tax. The savings of up to 15 cents per litre would make a tangible difference in their daily lives and livelihoods of our constituents. It will also benefit our small businesses. Frequently, I hear about residents in my riding. I've got a riding that's right on the border of Alberta who choose to drive across the border to fill up their vehicles in Alberta because gas is sometimes almost 60 cents a litre cheaper, a huge disparity. And just to do a quick Google search, it's $1.37 right now in places like Calgary and Lethbridge. Most of the residents I speak to who tell me they go there for their gas also tell me that they tend to end up doing a lot of shopping while they're there. This takes business away from local owners in my community who are suffering because British Columbians are being forced to buy their gas where it is far more affordable. What we are seeing is a surge in contractors coming from Alberta who compete with local BC companies for construction contracts, often winning because of their overhead is lower. These contractors bring fuel with them from Alberta to BC for construction projects because the cost is so much lower. They transport with them massive tanks of gasoline ranging from 80 to 100 gallons and more to power their equipment, resulting in significantly lower costs. Now, local contractors and British Columbians lose out on work and jobs because they can't compete with the lower costs Albertan contractors can provide. Something needs to be done about this. Under the NDP, British Columbians boast the highest gas prices and gas taxes in North America, putting a disproportionate burden on our residents. But instead of this NDP government making affordability a reality for British Columbians, they further punish the people of this province by ratcheting up climate targets to make up for their own failures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. For example, like increasing the carbon intensity reduction requirement from 20% to 30% by 2030, which came into effect January 1st of this year. This 30% is double what the Canadian standard is and adds about 11 cents per litre last year and adds about 13 cents a litre this year. Also, the carbon tax sits at $65 a tonne, adds about 31 cents per litre the cost of gasoline and 35 cents per litre of diesel. This makes up additional $34 to fill an average light-duty truck. For the big trucks that deliver virtually everything we use, it is an additional $163 to fill. Who do you think pays that cost? The Premier plans to triple the carbon tax in the next 6 years, which will add another 60 cents per litre, unless, of course, he's stopped in a provincial election next year. This will have a very negative effect for homeowners trying to heat their homes. Simply stated, Honourable Speaker.
Thank you, Member.
Well, thank you. Wow, that was quick.
Member for Surrey Panorama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is my pleasure to rise today and speak on this motion. Just at the outset, so that there is no confusion, I do not agree with the premise of this motion. And at the same time, I am very, very conscious of the struggle that families are having because of inflation in many aspects. And knowing what it's like when you get your heating bills or when you go to fill up your car with gas. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that when I looked at the profits made by the oil companies, what I see this motion as from BCUP is exactly that, increasing the profits for the oil companies. This is not about helping British Columbians at the oil pump. It is not. And just in case there's any doubt, you know, there's a premier in Alberta of a very similar thinking than the opposition, who actually believed that if he lowered the tax or removed it, that gas prices would drop. And yes, they did. Yes, they did. For a nanosecond. And then, this is what Kenny himself had to say, the then Premier of Alberta. Over the last 10 days, the gas price advantage Albertans have enjoyed relative to other provinces has disappeared, and it now appears Albertans are no longer benefiting from the tax cut. Not said by Ginny Sims, said by Jason Kenney, who clearly tried something and it didn't work. But once again, we have my colleagues across the way saying they believe in climate change, and at one time saying that carbon pricing is the only way to move forward, and now they're bringing forward a motion for the elimination. And they keep saying that carbon pricing doesn't work, that it hasn't helped, it hasn't been reduced. Well, I disagree. I disagree. That premise is false as well. BC's carbon tax price has reduced greenhouse gas emissions. BC's emissions are down from 2007, despite our significant population growth since then. And this is what my colleagues often forget is population growth. People in BC are leading the country in making the switch to zero-emission vehicles and heating their homes with clean energy. And you know, Mr. Speaker, you would think, living in BC, my colleagues across the way would more than know and be aware of the dangers of becoming climate change deniers. We have lived the reality of a term I'd never heard of before, atmospheric rain. The downpouring and the flooding and the damage it did to our infrastructure. We have seen the increase in fires, and we know that all of that is related to climate change, and I think most of my colleagues sitting across the way would agree with me that climate change is real. But it seems to me that recently they are trying to differentiate themselves or follow another group of people in this room by really going against what they believe in. There was a time, let me say, Mr. Speaker, they're the ones who brought in the carbon tax. And let me just say what the now leader of the official opposition said. If we eliminate the carbon tax, of course, you would have to see double-digit increase in both small business taxes and personal income taxes. Is that what they're wishing on the people of British Columbia right now? And also, what he said was, I think cancelling the carbon tax, my personal opinion, this is when he was in government, is that it would be a terrible mistake. And there is, you know, every now and then my opposition friends like to quote experts, though I do believe they are allergic to science-based data on most issues. But today I did hear them report from an expert. Well, a UBC energy economist, Werner Antweiler, has commented on earlier proposals to cut the gas tax. If the government were to reduce the fuel price by 10 cents a litre by virtue of a tax cut, it will mean there's a significant chunk that will go to the producers simply because they can. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Member for Delta South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today and speak in favour of this motion that supports the elimination of the provincial gas tax and seeks to provide British Columbians with the relief they desperately need. As the cost of living continues to skyrocket, many people across this province are living paycheck to paycheck, with over 50% of British Columbians within $200 of not being able to pay their monthly bills. That is why our BC United Caucus has put forward a slate of bold tax reforms that will directly help people struggling with the cost of living crisis. Cutting the provincial gas tax is one that could be adopted immediately, providing results and relief to British Columbians right away.
The NDP continue to represent the impacts of eliminating the provincial gas tax, which could save drivers up to 15 cents per litre. In fact, the claims of the members opposite that Alberta's suspension of the gas tax did not benefit drivers is contradicted by analysis conducted by prominent economists. Independent research led by University of Calgary economist Trevor Tome reveals that the tax relief was, and I quote, fully passed through, end quote, in both 2022 and 2023. Moreover, Tome's analysis highlights that 98% of Albertans experienced a tangible cost of living benefit from the suspension of the gas tax. Despite these concrete findings, this government's statements continue to mislead the public about the potential positive impacts of such a tax reduction. Honourable Speaker, this is not just about ending the pain at the pumps. It is about delivering tangible relief to the hardworking people of British Columbia. And Mr. Speaker, just recently, the leader of BC United brought forward 4 tax policy initiatives that will help save us tax in our fuels. Number 1 is removing the provincial fuel tax, which will save folks 15 cents a litre. Number 2 is the home heating, where the federal government announced in the maritime provinces they would take off the tax on home heating fuel, and we will move forward to do the exact same thing here in British Columbia. Number 3 is that the cap of $30 a ton will remain. We will not let this go to $65 a ton or even $170 a ton in future. And Mr. Speaker, the other is the reduction or elimination of carbon tax on farm fuels that are used by our agricultural sector here in British Columbia, including diesel, propane, gasoline, and natural gas. Mr. Speaker, as we debate this crucial matter today, we must also recognize the immediate positive impact this would have on the agricultural sector, benefiting our dedicated farmers and ranchers across this province and those who eat their products. Permanently removing the provincial fuel tax is not just about saving up to 15 cents per litre for individual drivers. It would provide substantial help to our farmers. In Delta, where vast stretches of farmland contribute to our community, this measure holds particular importance. For our local farmers, cutting the gas tax translates to substantial savings when filling up their machinery, reducing their operating costs. Lower costs for farmers means a reduction in the overall cost of food production, enabling them to offer more affordable prices to British Columbians. Consider a farmer in Delta relying on gasoline and diesel for their machinery. The elimination of the provincial fuel tax amounts to a meaningful savings, directly impacting their bottom line and contributing to the overall economic well-being of our agricultural community. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, one example is a family farming about 15 acres in Delta. The common person would never imagine how much fuel is used by a farm, and this Guichon, a huge potato farm in Delta, are using over $400,000 a year in fuel for their 23 tractors, 12 trucks, propane skid steers, forklifts, etc. So this is a massive benefit to the farming community if we remove the carbon tax off of farm use of fuels. Mr. Speaker, I hope the entire House can come together recognizing that a decision to eliminate the gas tax is not just about numbers on a fuel receipt. It is about putting money back into the pockets of hardworking people, including the farmers and ranchers in British Columbia who contribute so significantly to our province's prosperity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Richmond South Centre.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I was going to stick to my script, but I think I might have to deviate a bit, just so that we can actually truly capture the discussion for what we have today. For starters, I want to be clear that when it comes to carbon tax, majority of British Columbia will get more back than they pay. But our government understands that due to inflation and rise of interest rate, like people around the world, British Columbia are facing real challenges. And those global factors are driving out groceries and pushing up housing costs. And just lay the foundation, our government is working hard to reduce costs, like childcare, $900 a month, cutting ICBC rate $500 a year, boosting family benefits, lowering hydro costs, eliminating MSP, remove tolls, and so on and so on. Our government is determined to reduce costs for British Columbia while still moving forward on climate action. We must not forget, and I think unfortunately when I'm listening to the debate, is that we continue seem to be forgetting about the forest fire, the flood, the drought, the extreme heat dome, the number of lives lost, the quality of life being devastated, people's life being interrupted, and the amount of money has gone through in regard to intervention and prevention, making sure the firefighters are being supported, the amount of money is being dumped out in order for us to help British Columbian dealing with environment emergencies cannot be forgotten. We must understand that fundamentally, we're talking about reducing costs here. But we must also understand reducing costs is a long-term projection we need to look into. If we had done greater effort, we have placed greater effort in the beginning, early in 2000, early 1900s, my apology, 1990s, and just making sure we continue working away to combat against climate change. Think about how much money we can save. I want to take a moment to express my gratitude to one of the members talking about the importance of supporting farmers. But what happened with a devastating flood that we had earlier in 2022, which devastated multiple farmland, killed thousands of livestock? What about if we experience another drought? And forget about even driving your tractor on a dry field. We will have a phenomenal food security challenge ahead of us. We as a society must continue asking ourselves how we can make sure we're looking after our children. As a government, we are continually looking for a long-term strategy to ensure that we are looking for ways to place a price on pollution, to ensure we're changing people's behavior and moving towards the economy of the future. Another thing I want to talk about the future as well is when we have a government moving forward, we're going to have different countries competing for future economies. That's why our government is putting so much effort into helping us change towards directions such as tech sector, bioscience, and continue finding ways to actually moving towards renewable energy sectors. It will take time to transition, and we wish we transitioned earlier, but we did not. And now we're playing catch up. And if we're looking at all the devastation we're dealing with in our society right now, we could have saved so much more money today if the previous government invested earlier. If we find continuous way to help us prepare how we can actually combat against different forms of extreme weather events. So I want to use an example that I think my constituents can relate when it comes to why it's so important for us to invest early, invest now in our climate action plan. Look at our healthcare right now. Our healthcare is facing a lot of challenges. And yet, right now, our government is putting a second medical school. It will take time to construct. It will take time for us to recruit students. It will take time for us to find instructors. It will take time for us pumping out potential future doctors that will have to go through residency before they can join our workforce and help alleviate the stress we're dealing with today. And that's a reminder we must continuously understand that we are here not simply just supporting British Columbia today, but we must continue looking forward to support British Columbia tomorrow and realizing that climate action is an important factor that we, British Columbia, must continue to take leadership role in North America, around the world, to lead our global fight to ensure that we do not leave unnecessary deficit because we are trying to create little cuts and political means today. We must find a way to continuously ask ourselves, how can we adjust behaviors? How can we adjust industries? How can we make sure we're not looking just simply today, but tomorrow, to ensure that British Columbians cannot just capture the economy of today, that we will have an environment, we will have the community, we will have a food security, water security, that we still can enjoy today, that we don't lose track of it for tomorrow. So thank you, Speaker, for allowing me to speak on this motion today.
Thank you, Member. Member for Surrey White Rock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise and I support this motion put forward by my colleague from Peace River North, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak on this. A few weeks ago, I actually shared the story in my house about a constituent of mine who is now sleeping in her car with her daughter, and just due to lack of housing in the constituency of Surrey White Rock. And one of the major challenges she has is obviously on affordability. And we now live in a society where this has somewhat become the norm. And we're here, after 2 terms of NDP government, where we have an affordability crisis that has never been worse than it is today in the history of our province. And people are hurting today. And one of my colleagues shared the story about going across the border, the provincial border, into Alberta to get gas and cheaper groceries. Now, I live in South Surrey, and I can tell you, right now, every single day, either the Peace Arch border, the truck crossing, is lined up with British Columbia license plates to go get gas in Blaine or to go get groceries in Blaine or Bellingham. That's happening every single day. And Point Roberts, as my colleague points out. That's every single day. We put forward a solution that people have been calling for. We've been calling for quite a while in this House. It's a solution that will save people money in real time. It can be dismissed, whether $25 or $30 a week. For a lot of people in my riding, for that lady that's now sleeping in her car with her daughter, that's being able to have dinner that night. That's what we're talking about. When we're talking about taking the tax off of home heating, for some of these families, many of these families, when we're talking about families that are $200 away from not being able to pay their bills, $200. I think that's pretty important stuff that we're talking about here today. Now, we talk about a carbon tax, and I know there's people here that they campaigned against the carbon tax in 2009. And things change, and that carbon tax was revenue neutral. Right? Now and people can laugh, and I think even I actually remember, because I worked here at a period of time, I remember the Minister of Health made a speech at UBCM, and he talked about the carbon tax. And he talked about the importance of making sure that went to, I think at the time it was environmentally friendly infrastructure. That goes into general revenues now. Right? It was a good speech. I give him that. But you know what? At the time, I think things evolve. But right now, I think when the Minister of Health made that speech, we certainly weren't in the affordability crisis we are now. People actually, I think when he made that speech, gas was, I got it here, I think gas was maybe a $1.15, maybe even a little bit less than that. But we see it now, and somebody says we've been having challenges in this province when it comes to affordability for a few years now, and now we're at a crippling rate. And we see it every day when people get their bills or when people go to the pump. And those gas prices aren't just inflicted when you fill up your car. As my colleague from Delta points out, they're inflicted when you go to the grocery store. It's everywhere. It's when you get your restaurant bill. If you can afford to go to a restaurant at this point, which many people just can't. Or when you buy your produce for that restaurant. It's all there. And that relief helps everybody. So, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the importance of speaking. I'm disappointed. We saw over the weekend that the NDP chose to triple down on a tax, and only in NDP land can you see taxes go up, emissions go up, and somehow that makes sense to them, right? That all seems to calculate out, and that wouldn't hire any of them as accountants because that math does not work, but that's, in their view, that's economics. So
Thank you, Member.
I want to thank Mr. Speaker for the time to speak to this important issue today.
Member for Richmond, Queensborough.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, this really doesn't warrant a response on this in this day and age, especially in British Columbia, that after years of climate emergencies, they choose to ignore the Ukraine war, COVID. Let's just listen to Trevor Toome, University of Calgary economist, who also happens to be on the Fraser Institute, not partisan at all. Let me point you, Mr. Speaker, to the largest statement of economists in history ever signed in support of the carbon tax and in support of fuel taxes. 3,600, you'll find it in the Wall Street Journal in 2019. 3,649 U.S. economists, 4 former chairs of the Federal Reserve, 28 Nobel laureates, 15 former chairs of Council of Economic Advisors, but they know better. Anyways, life is hard. We understand that. Life is hard with high prices at the pump. My friend talked about the pump. There's been lineups at the pump at the border ever since I moved here in 1988, December 1988. I've seen those lineups. I see people go across the border. That anecdotal evidence means absolutely nothing. What does mean something is 3,649 U.S. economists signing on to statements like this. We understand that life is hard. Prices at the pump impact families. And these spikes in the cost of living have made it difficult for many families and many households to make ends meet. So many families are facing real challenges. Global inflation has driven up the cost of groceries, and high interest rates are pushing up housing costs. I shudder to think where people would be at if they had still been in power. But this is why our government has consistently taken action, Mr. Speaker, to help address costs of living for people, reducing childcare costs, cutting ICBC rates, boosting family benefits, lowering hydro costs. What this motion does, it also ignores the real costs of the climate crisis, which we've seen here in BC with fires, floods, droughts, and extreme heat. We put a price on pollution and are putting money back into the pockets of lower and middle income families. Most people will get more back than they pay into the carbon tax. We, Mr. Speaker, as a government, are determined to reduce costs for people while moving forward on climate action that is necessary. Just like we have been doing in helping people make this switch to heat pumps to cut pollution and their bills, heating your home with oil is very expensive. That's why we've been pushing Ottawa for a deal to provide free heat pumps for people in BC, switching from expensive fossil fuels for their home heating. People need help with costs. We will continue to be there for people, but what this motion is proposing is absolutely the wrong approach. So, Mr. Speaker, what really is the argument behind, the simple argument behind the member's motion? Let's go through it. Financial relief, essentially. Lowering fuel taxes, the simple argument, lowering fuel taxes can save money for vehicle owners, potentially providing, especially during periods of high fuel prices, some relief. But the evidence just isn't there. It doesn't support this argument. Reducing fuel tax does not save people money, especially for low-income individuals, some of whom may not even own a car. It may temporarily make gas cheaper for everyone. It benefits higher-income individuals who own cars the most. Additionally, cutting gasoline taxes can lead to increased fuel consumption, again, benefiting fuel companies and contributing to pollution and climate change. Even The Economist argues that cutting fuel taxes is a mistake, as it wastes money and makes it harder to reduce the demand for fuel, which is essential in this day and age for transitioning away from fossil fuels. Not only that, the revenue generated pays for vital infrastructure and services that benefit people that are struggling the most. What would they do? They don't have a plan. We know what they would do. They did it for 16 years. They would cut services to people like you and me. They would cut services to British Columbians. Again, I shudder to think what would have happened had they been in the position that we are in now. And like I said, we've seen this story before. On top of that, the adjunct environmental impact is costly and adds to the already severe emergency crisis that we are in right now. And the economic cost of that, we can't even calculate the economic cost of that. And again, economic costs like that disproportionately affect people who are poorer. And really, it's ineffective relief. Cutting fuel taxes does not effectively provide relief to those most impacted. There are arguments against reducing fuel tax. Multitudes of them out there. And the potential negative impacts of cutting fuel tax and cutting carbon tax far outweigh any cost benefit that you would get. Again, I know my time is almost over, but we've been reducing costs for people, ICBC, childcare.
Thank you, Member.
Thank you.
Member for Peace River South.
Well, thank you, Chair. It's an honor to get up and speak today from the speaking to the motion that my colleague from Peace River North put forward. And I'm actually going to start by reading that motion again because we have not heard it from a lot of the members here in a bit. So be it resolved that this House supports permanently eliminating the provincial fuel tax to ease the pain at the pump and removing the carbon tax on home heating. So what's one of the reasons why this comes forward? Well, we've heard from a lot of colleagues on this side of the House that we are in an affordability crisis, that people are struggling all around the province of British Columbia right now to make ends meet. And what's really important is that we look at ways and mechanisms to help people in this time while they're struggling. And so let me explain a little bit about how that would really work on the ground. Because we have some of these virtue signaling, altruistic kind of comments that come from the NDP that are not really materialistically affecting people the way it should to support them in this affordability crisis. Now, in my town of Dawson Creek, I'm about 5 miles from the Alberta border. Perfect example. I can drive 5 miles and save 30 cents a litre just by going into Alberta. 30 cents a litre. So, of course, one of the things we look at, and I'm a big proponent of, is how do we lower the costs for people in my region and in British Columbia? So eliminating 15 cents right off the top that the province has control of will definitely help people. Now, the NDP are trying to say, oh, it's not a lot of money. Oh, it's not going to help a lot. Well, I can tell you for a single mom struggling right now, to save $20, $30 on filling up her tank of gas, if she's fortunate enough to have a little minivan to get her family around, that's huge. But we also talked about the carbon tax, eliminating it on home heating. We've seen this happen right across Canada right now, except where? In British Columbia. This is something the province has control of. This is something that we could do about fairness, equity, to support people and families in British Columbia. People in my region have no choice, zero choice, but to heat their homes right now. -10, -15, -20. We get stretches, as we know, up in my region, -30, -40. To hear the NDP say, but don't worry, we're going to get everybody on heat pumps. Well, newsflash, they don't work in rural British Columbia. This is a part of the business that I know very well. Heat pumps do not work. Once you hit about -18 to -20, you need a secondary heat source. So you're forcing people now to go into 2. Not going to work. So we need to go back to the root causes and effects that we can help people with affordability. So this is something I definitely support. Making sure we eliminate the carbon tax from home heating. And we've gone as far as saying if the federal government eliminates carbon tax in Canada, we under the BC United will do the same in the province of British Columbia to make sure that we have that fair advantage and competitiveness right across for our industry, for our families, for the province as a whole. The government's trying to say, oh, don't worry, we're going to raise carbon tax to $170 a ton, as if that will somehow miraculously affect our carbon emissions. Guess what? One of the best ways that we can reduce global emissions, as one of my first colleagues talked about, is supporting LNG and clean technology that will actually, and my member from the Green Party can laugh all he wants, and I'm sure he might have time to speak, but not today, because I'll have to close off debate, it looks like, noting the time here soon. But we have seen that. When you, well, you know, I always love being heckled because it gives me opportunity. I wish I had more time because I hate to inform the members from the NDP and even the Green Party, when we're burning coal in China, that those molecules of air actually come and we breathe them here in British Columbia. I know the Green Party wants to be like the Truman Show and think there's just a little dome over the province of British Columbia and everything we do affects only us. Well, guess what? This is a global economy, global emissions. And if we can actually do our part to actually help the world, then actually we're helping ourselves. So by reducing the carbon tax and the provincial sales tax is actually going to help families help pocketbooks today. It's something we can do, and I urge this government to do just that. Thank you.
A third party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's important to just note that this motion is it's bad politics, it's bad economics, and it needs to be framed in the comments. These comments need to be framed in the UN emissions gap report that was released this morning. Fossil fuel production and use has reached record highs, producing nearly 90% of CO2 emissions. We're on track for 3 degrees of global warming. Now is not the time to shy away from tackling climate change, but to lean in. If anyone thinks that doing less is somehow going to make things better, they're sorely mistaken. The tax on fuel and the carbon tax are not the reasons British Columbians are facing an affordability struggle. The fuel tax we pay at the pump funds transportation and other critical infrastructure in our communities. Is transportation infrastructure free? Will the members of this House have an honest discussion with British Columbians about the need to create revenue-generating programs such as mobility pricing to manage and fund transportation infrastructure in the future? Cutting red tape and deregulating industry will not create the revenue we need to upgrade and expand the transportation network. Cutting taxes sounds appealing, but it doesn't solve the problem. Someone, somewhere will pay. The idea to price pollution is to change behavior, not punish people. For those who cannot afford to change fuel type, carbon tax rebates are designed to neutralize the cost. And it provides an incentive to switch to low-carbon tech. It's good policy and it's good economics. It uses a price mechanism to manage demand rather than regulation, and arguing to remove it is bad politics and nothing more than a quick win. Taxing people and corporations who pollute is the right approach. While British Columbians face suffocating social and economic pressures, the cost of food, fuel, and housing, we face an existential threat from climate change. No one in British Columbia is spared from extreme weather events. Nothing is more terrifying than the raging inferno of wildfires. Nothing is more powerful than water in the atmospheric rivers and rains. Aging 20th century infrastructure, the dikes, the dams, the culverts, can't handle the 21st century extreme weather events. The emotional costs of crisis on people and communities are heavy, and the financial cost is unsustainable. The BC United have to understand this. They've been besieged by fire and fearing freshet for years. If we cut the carbon tax and the gas tax, do we think the savings will line the pockets of the public? It's some sort of magical thinking. The fossil fuel corporations, like the corporations that control our food, will raise their prices and they'll take that profit. The federal and provincial governments have been proven unable to hold them accountable. We fall for their corporate lobbying, arguing the cost of doing business in British Columbia is too high, yet these multinationals post billion-dollar quarterly profits. I agree it is too costly for small business, but not for the multinationals. These are the same predatory corporations that strip our environment bare, frack and drain our aquifers, and abandon industrial waste for the public to clean up. Greedy corporate profit-taking, skyrocketing prices, shrinking proportions. We get more and pay less. Mr. Speaker, I'll end with this. Let's tax the excessive corporate profits pilfered from hardworking British Columbians. Let's tax the pollution and force the polluter to pay their proportion. Let's make the heaviest emitters, including LNG, pay their fair share. Let's improve the carbon tax, not cut it. Increase personal rebates so they reflect the amount of carbon tax that people pay. Mr. Speaker, finally, let's get real in this place, because this motion was not real. British Columbians deserve serious politics, not bad politics.
Member to adjourn the debate.
I'll adjourn the debate.
Member, you heard the question to adjourn the debate. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I move the House now adjourn.
Member, you heard the question. All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. This House stands adjourned until 1:30 p.m.